Seeing this, seeing Antarctica, you realise, yes, the huge volume that's here, but if this disappears, if elements of this disappear, the enormous impact that will have on the rest of the world.
Lieutenant General Richard Nugee spent 36 years in the British Army and commanded thousands of troops in Iraq and Afghanistan. Away from the military, his other lifelong interest has been the environment, and in 2021 he wrote a groundbreaking report for the Ministry of Defence, setting out how it needs to become more sustainable and adapt to global warming. Climate change is a significant challenge, he wrote. Without adequate assessment of its effects, we leave ourselves exposed. If you don't deal with it today, you will not be able to deal with it tomorrow. The general's come to the Antarctic to see for himself how it's being affected by climate change and what's at stake.
Climate change science has latched on to the concept of tipping points. And the concept of tipping points is once you go beyond a certain point, you cannot get back. It's like going over a cliff edge. You can't decide you don't want to go over the cliff once you're over it. So yes, my report is about what the MOD can do. And those who say the MOD are big emitters, yes we are. Those who say the MOD shouldn't be getting involved in climate security, I would fundamentally disagree. The MOD has a duty to protect our security. It's a security against whatever the threat. And this is fanciful, but if we were invaded by Martians, who would you turn to? You'd turn to the military. That's not a threat that we've countered and thought about. It's a threat because it's something damaging our national security. This disappearing would damage our national security. The MOD, the military, should be alive to what it can do to prevent that. And there's two preventions. It's preventing by understanding and intervening where it is right to intervene to try and make sure that the real damage done by climate change doesn't happen. But it's also reducing our own emissions, because we are emitting a lot and we need to reduce it.
There's now a consensus among scientists that those emissions are contributing to global warming, and its effects are being felt at the extremes of our planet, the Arctic and here in the southern oceans. Antarctica is the world's 5th largest continent and holds around 70% of the Earth's fresh water. 70 million years ago, much of it was forest. Fossils show it was a much warmer place, with dinosaurs roaming here. To step ashore, you have to sanitize everything, from bags to boots, part of an effort to protect this pristine environment.
Oh, Hannah, good morning.
We've sailed here on a commercial cruise liner, one of many that now bring tourists to the peninsula.
Welcome. What an amazing sight.
It is a very beautiful place.
So who couldn't love something like this in this weather? It's what you see is the pure majesty, the hugeness of the mountains coming right down to the sea. It's just stunning, absolutely stunning. Everywhere you look, it is just beautiful.
But that beauty is under threat. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, says large areas of Antarctic ice are disappearing, and with it the krill, which penguins and other species feed on. Average temperatures here on the peninsula have risen by 3 degrees since the 1950s, 5 times the rate of global warming seen elsewhere on Earth, and the fear is it will cause irreparable damage.
And that threat is very real. Global warming is changing the delicate ecosystem here in Antarctica at a potentially catastrophic rate. The ice-free period here now lasts 3 months longer than it did just back in 1979. Nearly all the glaciers are in retreat, and the ice shelves are crumbling, threatening to bring a rapid rise in sea levels.
On the first day I didn't put sunscreen on, and it was a grey, murky day, and I got sunburned. Yeah. Because the UV here, because there's a hole in the ozone layer, or a very thin ozone layer, the UV just comes straight through. So the UV here is really, really high. So even if the sun isn't shining, you're getting UV rays. Yeah. And so I've been slapping on the sunscreen ever since.
So what's happening to the climate here? Well, the IPCC says the ocean is acting like a sponge, absorbing carbon dioxide and heat to regulate its temperature. The problem is, it can't keep up. At the Esperanza base on the peninsula, they get more than 70 centimetres of rain or snow a year, and an average temperature of minus 5 degrees Celsius. Go to the middle of Antarctica though, and it's a different picture. At Russia's Vostok research station, there's hardly any real snowfall. It's extremely dry, and the average temperature is minus 55. So why the huge difference? Well, one reason is global warming, the result of rising greenhouse gases. Quite simply, the edge of Antarctica is absorbing increasing amounts of heat from the sea that surrounds it.
We are already in trouble.
At COP26, the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, 200 countries agreed on a goal to limit the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees. In the UK, defence accounts for half of all the government's emissions. And for the sake of places like Antarctica, says the General, that has to change.
But the military weren't really doing much in terms of trying to reduce their emissions. They weren't doing much in terms of thinking about how to fight in an environment which is much warmer. And it's odd standing here in the Antarctic, but what we're talking about is extremely warm environments which we're going to have to fight in the future. And if we want to maintain our freedom of manoeuvre as a military to go anywhere in the world that we're told to go by our government, we need to understand that the environment around us is changing. The change is so rapid at the moment that we need to understand what is the world going to look like in 2040, what is the world going to look like in 2050, and then do something about it so that we're not caught out by nature itself.
What about the critics who say that the MOD isn't being transparent enough? It needs to open up and be honest about the emissions that it's actually producing.
So we report what we're told to report by government, but I would go much further than that. But we now have the data for understanding what our emissions are. We also have a very good estimate of what the defence industry, which supports us so strongly, has in terms of emissions. So we're beginning to get to that, and I would willingly publish that. But we need to do this in concert with the rest of government. We need to make sure that we as a department are part of the solution, not part of the problem, of the whole of government. And the military to date have not worked hard enough to try and reduce their emissions. So it's really straightforward. We as the military have a direct impact, albeit small because we're a relatively small military, but we have a direct impact on the lives of the penguins and other animals in the Antarctic. And seeing this, it shows how fragile this whole environment is. It may look austere, but with the amount of melt that's going on that is increasing, what we're seeing is more environmental damage through the global warming that's taking place.
The Antarctic's home to 7 species of penguins, plus a host of other marine life, from seals to humpback whales. For the tourists that sail here, it's more than just a holiday. There's a chance to learn as well. The ship's crew includes experts in a variety of scientific fields, all of them aware of the impact global warming is having here.
You've been down to the Antarctic a lot, you've been to the Arctic, and you're very much understanding the animals of the polar regions. I'm really interested in understanding how climate change is affecting their migration patterns, affecting their viability of their species, as to whether climate change and the warming of the world is actually damaging them or is making it easier for them.
Yeah, well, it's actually makes it worse for them. Yeah, well, for instance, we have the Gen 2 penguins, who used to be a sub-Antarctic species, and they are now coming down further south, pushing the Adelis further and further south, which basically means it's getting they are pushed into a corner, which basically means they're also pushed further south. They have to have a snow-free ground to put their eggs on, but eventually when you come far south enough, then there is no
rock
no.
for them to...
Exactly. So that means that they will actually have to put their eggs on snow, and there will come nothing from that. They will not make it, and therefore they will not hatch, and therefore their reproduction cycle will be broken.
So there's a real chance that because of things getting warmer and other species coming south, that the penguins like the Adelie will actually cease to exist because they'll be forced into an environment where they can't operate, they can't reproduce.
Yeah, that could be the risk of the warming.
The climate change that's happening here isn't uniform. In parts of Antarctica, there's actually more ice forming, the result of new weather patterns caused by changes to the polar winds. And where there is melting, it's hard to see because the glaciers roll into the ocean as ice shelves, which are melting from below. 87% of them are now in retreat, with some moving by 10 metres a day.
So what you're getting is you're getting warm water coming down from the equator, coming through the Antarctic convergence, and they're coming under the glaciers, and that is melting the glaciers far faster than we're actually seeing on the surface.
Far faster on the surface, absolutely. So, but that again is in the western part of Antarctica, and what's happened is they're following old glacial trenches, and so you can imagine during a period when the glaciers extended much further out at the last glacial maximum, they created trenches. And essentially what's happening is the warm water is following the troughs, those trenches, and they're coming up underneath of the glaciers. They're coming up underneath of the fast ice, and they're melting it from the bottom up. If you were to look up at it, you would actually see things that look like the Grand Canyon underneath of the ice.
So are we seeing perhaps a greater acceleration than even we anticipated?
Scientists have been telling us this for the past 15 years. The scientists have known this. They've been studying this. It's just recently as the water temperature, again, it's the ocean that's absorbing most of our temperatures right now. And so as the water temperatures in the polar regions are warming even faster, there's greater alarm. So the scientists have been saying this for a while, but people haven't been listening.
I'm obviously from the military, and I've done a report for the UK military to try and encourage them and persuade them to try and reduce their emissions, ideally to net zero by 2050. And we've got a minister agreed that we're going to do as much as we possibly can to get to net zero by 2050, which is fantastic.
That is fantastic.
Do you think there's a role for the US military, you're from America, to have a similar sort of view?
I think there's a role for every person in America to have that sort of similar view, not just the military. The federal government can certainly set the example, and an easy place to mandate that is moving toward net zero is within the military. And once you start that type of process and it becomes a part of what we do, others will mimic it.
And I think that much of what we've got to do is identify, innovate, and then embrace new technologies.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree. And the technologies that are coming around, the greener technologies, are creating more jobs, and a lot of that spins out of the military. The military does it first, and then it sort of, that technology becomes a part of into the public, and it creates new jobs. I mean, there's a whole world of green technology out there that can spur on our technology without the current consumption that we see.
The General's of course aware that coming here in itself has created emissions. At home he's tried to offset his own carbon footprint by planting hundreds of trees. He's also exploring whether he can install hydropower. In Antarctica, the effects of climate change are becoming ever more visible. The huge Thwaites Glacier, roughly the size of Great Britain, the latest to show signs of melting. If it does, it would raise sea levels here by ½ a metre. For General Nugee, this has been literally a voyage of discovery, a chance to see and learn why this place matters so much, and why the UK military, and indeed armed forces worldwide, must do their bit to protect this most precious of places. Simon Newton, Forces News, Antarctica. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.